To understand Mercury in the 11th house, let's start by understanding Mercury and the 11th house. So let's start with the 11th house. Here it is. Physically, it's the eastern side of the overhead sky. And since the overhead sky represents the public and the eastern sky represents the self, the 11th house represents the way the public benefits us. For example, we get access to society. So the 11th house signifies community, contacts, and networks. The 11th house represents socializing with those networks. And so it's a friendly house, and it has to do with that kind of social friendship. The 11th house also has to do with exchanging things with people. And thus it has to do with gaining and getting income and profiting. Society also gives us culture. So the 11th house has to do with arts and entertainment. It also has to do with the ability to produce art and the ability to enjoy art. So it has to do with talent and refinement. Finally, the 11th house represents enjoyment or pleasure. Now that we understand the 11th house, let's understand Mercury, and then we'll be ready to understand Mercury in the 11th house. Mercury is the planet of intellect, so it has to do with communication. Communication enables interaction. Interaction enables relationships. And relationships enable enjoyment, relaxation, and so forth. Intellect isn't just about giving out information, it's also about taking in information. So it's not only about communication, it's also about learning. The more information you take in, the more careful you have to be how you store it. So Mercury has to do with organization. The more carefully you store things, the more symmetrical or balanced you become. And the more balanced you are, the more able you are to act with refinement and dexterity. So Mercury represents dexterity. Now that we've understood Mercury and the 11th house, we can put them together. All we have to do is literally put the symbolisms together side by side and see where they're on the same page. For example, Mercury symbolizes interaction, and the 11th house symbolizes socializing. So Mercury in the 11th house is going to be all about that. Mercury symbolizes expertise, and the 11th house symbolizes talent. So that describes Mercury in the 11th house. Mercury is all about recreation or enjoyment, and so is the 11th house. So that's another theme of Mercury in the 11th. And finally, Mercury symbolizes trade and exchange, and so does the 11th house. So that's your fourth theme. Let's unpack these a little bit more. If the planet of interaction is in the house of socializing and interaction, what do you think that means? That symbolizes being very well connected, having a lot of contacts, having good contacts. If the planet of expertise is in the house of talent, what do you think that means? It means talent, having expertise, having talent, having skill, being artistic, being communicative, being expressive, being intelligent. If the planet of recreation is in the house of pleasure, what do you think that means? That means the person is pleasant. They are good at relaxing. They're good at helping other people relax. They're enjoyable. They're entertaining. They're pleasurable. And finally, if the planet of trade and exchange is in the house of trade and exchange, what do you think that means? They're not poor, they're wealthy. Or they're effective at exchanging things, so that also means they're an effective communicator. Now we understand the abstract of what Mercury in the 11th house represents by itself, outside of the context of a chart. Let's look at 5 famous people who have Mercury in the 11th house so that we can see how this abstract will work in specific contexts. First, let's look at Will Farrell. He's, in fact, very well networked. You have to be to work in LA. He's very talented. He's very pleasant, entertaining, enjoyable. He's very funny. And he's very wealthy, and he's very good at communication and words. So why is he such a good match for what we expected from Mercury in the 11th house? Because he doesn't really have anything that contradicts it in the context of the rest of his chart. And Mercury in his 11th house is a prominent thing for him, primarily because Mercury is his first lord. And by the way, his ascendant is in Purva Phalguni, which is also very entertaining and pleasurable. Secondly, Mercury is his 10th lord as well. So it would be a very visible thing about him. It would be part of his career, all the things associated with Mercury in the 11th house. In addition, his 11th lord is in the 3rd house, so this strengthens artistic and talent because the 3rd house is also very important for skill and talent. And finally, Venus is in the 1st house. That will help. But also what's particularly interesting about this is his Venus is in the 11th house from his moon. Another famous person with Mercury in the 11th house is the great Salvador Dali. Another great artist. Why? Well, his Mercury is his 3rd lord. So again, the 3rd house combining with the 11th house. And his 3rd lord, Mercury, is joined very closely to Mars, within 2 degrees of Mars. And Mars is his 5th lord and his 10th lord as well. So it's his Yoga Karaka planet and it's his 5th lord. So now you're joining the 3rd with the 5th in the 11th. And that is the most common recipe for significantly talented artists. Furthermore, it's in Taurus 11th house with the 11th lord Venus. He has something that I would call a bracketing Raja Yoga because Mars on the one side of this stellium in his 11th house is the 5th lord, the lord of a trine, and Venus on the other end of it is the lord of a Kendra, an angle, the 4th house. Furthermore, look at his 11th house from his moon. The 11th house from his moon is Aquarius, and it has its own lord in it. Another famous individual with Mercury in the 11th house is Agatha Christie. Mercury is her 10th lord, so again, it will be visible in her. It's also very bright. It's very far from the sun. It's almost at its maximum distance from the sun. And like Salvador Dali, it's in a Venus sign in the 11th house. Furthermore, her 1st lord is in the 3rd house, while her 3rd lord is in the 10th house with the sun. So 10th lord in the 11th house, while the 3rd lord is in the 10th house, shows a career that's involved in arts. And particularly, it's 3rd house heavy because the 1st lord is in the 3rd and the 3rd is in the 10th. So it's more about writing than it is about performance in her case. There's also a big influence from her 3rd lord to her 11th lord because Saturn is exactly aspecting the 11th lord. But she's not like a performing artist or visual artist. She's more hidden. In fact, she was very hidden. So that has to do with Venus being in the 12th and also her 11th house from the moon as its lord in the 12th. A 4th famous person with Mercury in the 11th is Marilyn. Well, her Mercury is her 11th lord and it's with the 1st lord. So this is very performancey. This is very showy. This is very personally being the entertaining thing. Why is she a sex symbol entertainer? It's because her ascendant is very strongly aspected by the moon. So it's very beautiful. Meanwhile, her first lord, the sun, is in Gemini, the 11th house, with the 11th lord, Mercury. So it's very symmetrical, balanced, etc. But the main thing really with Marilyn is sex appeal. So that has to do with the influence from the moon to the ascendant, while the moon is the 12th lord, and it is joined to the 8th lord, Jupiter. And of course, it doesn't hurt that her Venus is in Aries. Finally, let's look at somebody who doesn't seem to really fit the picture of Mercury in the 11th house, lucky Luciano, the gangster. So in his case, Mercury is not the 1st or the 3rd or the 10th lord, it's the 8th lord. The very interesting thing about Luciano is the malefics are all ganged up on both his first lord and his moon, and also his sun. So all of the 3 primary personal points are completely malefically dominated. His first lord is Saturn, and it's with the other malefics, the sun and Mars. And furthermore, this moon is malefic because it's empty, and this Mercury is malefic because it's with the sun and Mars. Then if you look at it from the moon's point of view, it's with all 3 natural malefics, Saturn, Sun, and Mars, and it's with the temporary malefic, Mercury, who's malefic by association. And then if you look at it as the sun, it's bracketed by the 2 natural malefics, Saturn and Mars, and it's with the temporary malefics, Moon and Mercury. So this, yes, he has Mercury in the 11th house, but the really outstanding thing here is the maleficence in this chart. Furthermore, all of his planets are clumped into 3 signs, which is called Shula Yoga, which indicates a fighting kind of personality. If you want to understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdecara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have 2 groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, Your Nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. And the newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tarabala to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.